What happens if we have a second EU referendum? That's a second Brexit referendum for the UK to leave the EU, the European Union. Now, I know I've just said a dirty word to some of you, but I wanted to explore the results that we get if we had a second referendum. But first, I want to go through the situation that might lead up to having that second referendum. So in March 2019, Theresa May is meant to have her Brexit deal negotiated, passed through Parliament and agreed by the European Union. But by either the UK Parliament or the EU Parliament, it could get blocked, and we could simply run out of time to get this deal through. So Theresa May has said,
no deal is better than a bad deal.
But if you read the subtext, then it's a lie, because she's implying that she would admit that she'd done a bad job to Parliament and the country, and therefore admit it by pulling a no deal, which a politician has never ever done before. Furthermore, Labour will block or reject any inference of a no deal. It's unlikely that the Labour side of Parliament would allow Theresa May to pull a no deal in the first place. So it's unlikely that we will actually get a no deal. The next most logical step would be to ask for an extension on the Brexit negotiations.
So the message that comes up is fear, fear, fear. Fear because you won't have any food. Fear of unemployment. Fear that we've somehow been so reduced as a country that we can no longer, as it were, totter about in the world independent as a nation.
So we currently have a 2-year time limit, and that ends in March 2019, and then a transition period. Theresa May would then have to go to the EU and ask all member states to agree to extend the time period that we have to negotiate to get a deal through. And obviously that would be hated by Brexiteers, who feel that she will simply just try and keep us in more and more and more and more. So failing that is another Tory leadership election, in which the Tory party decide a different leader to take over the role of Brexit negotiations and to try and reach this final deal. And I've made a video on this before about who might possibly replace Theresa May. If the Tories decide who is going to be their leader, then they're also deciding who is going to be Prime Minister, which isn't very democratic. So that in itself might spark a general election. Different parties offer to go in and different parties offer to go out, and there might be some offering a second referendum, there might be some offering a no deal. And it might just be that one of those parties wins, or before a general election, we have a second referendum. It could be that we have that general election after the Brexit deal is negotiated, and therefore the second referendum comes post-negotiation, in which case it would be a case of, do you want to go back in, or do you want to stay out? And obviously, I think on that occasion, the idea for the public to go through all the headache of trying to get back in again would simply just be Brexit fatigue, and they simply would say, you know what, we're kind of okay now with being out, we're out now, we might as well stay out. But then if we did have a second Brexit referendum, you have the conundrum of deciding what actually goes into that referendum, what question the public get asked to vote on, and what the options are to win. So the first option of a second referendum would be just to simply rerun the first referendum. The second option would be for Theresa May's deal versus Remain, or no deal versus Remain, or any combination of those three, or even all three. And the third option would be something more specific, such as the customs union, the single market, Scotland, the Northern Ireland border, anything specific. So if you take a look at the first referendum's results on the left, you can see that Scotland voted mainly to remain, Northern Ireland voted mainly to remain, but the north of England, big parts of the Midlands, and everywhere basically apart from the south east and parts of Wales, voted to leave. But if you look on the right, you can see the MPs that supported Remain versus Leave. Remain in yellow, Leave in blue. And you can see the difference in the north of England, and just generally how much of Parliament supported Remain compared to Leave. And that would be the first problem of offering a second referendum, would be that it would seem like it was an establishment cover-up or an establishment trying to get us back in somehow.
You are destroying our lives.
So I just wanted to show you some opinion polls about Brexit. So the public were asked, do you agree the EU is trying to bully the UK in the Brexit negotiations? 67% of people agreed or strongly agreed. 49% of those were Remain supporters. That's according to the Sunday Telegraph. So you can see that a lot of people are against the way the EU is handling these negotiations. But in a Guardian poll, 45% of people thought that Brexit would have a negative impact on the economy, and 40% of people said it would make no difference to their personal finances. So there's a disparity there. 57% of British citizens support the idea of a second referendum, according to BMG, and 55% of voters would support Britain remaining in the EU, according to Comres. But as we know, these polls can be wrong.
If we vote to leave on the 23rd of June, we will be voting for higher prices. We will be voting for fewer jobs. We will be voting for lower growth. We will be voting potentially for a recession.
So one of the biggest cons of just simply rerunning the first referendum would be that it doesn't really clear up anything. It's not very specific. The first referendum was very divisive. There were a lot of lies told. There were a lot of misinformation and just generally whole communities and families splitting apart over their position on this referendum. It has the potential to split the country up even more. And then you've got that whole constitutional conundrum in which if we have one leave vote as the first one and one remain vote as the second one, what on earth does that mean? What do we do? If we have two leave votes, it's not very clear because it's only telling us that the public want to leave again. So repeating the first referendum as it was simply just wouldn't make any constitutional sense. But what about option 2? So option 2 was Theresa May's deal versus Remain, which would be very Remain-y because it basically offers a soft Brexit or Remain. No deal versus Theresa May deal, which would be a bit more Brexit-y because it's basically offering hard Brexit or soft Brexit. But then you have no deal versus Remain, which is very highly risky politically because it's basically offering, do you want a threat to your economy or a threat to your politics? And then you could have a combination of all three, but then it splits the leave vote in two because then you've got Theresa May's deal or no deal, making it unfairly biased for Remain because Remain is obviously less options, so more people can gravitate towards that one option. So what about option 3? So not option 3 is kind of more creative and specific referendum. So it could be like a number of different options and the public decide which option they prefer. It could be a specific thing on the customs union and the single market. Do you want access to them or not? It could be just simply that Northern Ireland does, and it's about the Northern Irish border. It could be rephrased as a Scottish referendum, or it might eventually end up being hijacked by the SNP, saying, if you vote Remain, you're also leaving the UK, we'll guarantee that or something. And therefore it becomes more of a Scottish referendum than it is an EU referendum. Or it could be part of a general election in which parties put their policies about Brexit. Some go for no deal, some go for Remain, some go for soft Brexit, some go for hard Brexit, and you vote for the party. But then, if it's part of a general election, it becomes about more than just, as we found out in the last election, it becomes about more than just Brexit. It's about the economy, the general politics. Who do you want to be the Prime Minister? So in the event of a general election, I just wanted to take a look at the parties. So the Conservatives would obviously offer the deal that they negotiated, regardless of whether it was a new leader or not. They would say, we've done a good job. And for them to admit that they did a bad job would be highly counterproductive. Labour, on the other hand, as they did in 2017, they would refuse a no deal at all. And they would want to get back into a customs union, so it would be even softer than Theresa May's eventual deal. And if we had a general election before the end of negotiations, they would probably scrap Theresa May's deal at all and make their own. The Lib Dems were offering a second referendum in 2017, so they would probably want a complete reversal of the entire Brexit negotiation process, and that would be part of that general election, in which their vote is essentially a vote to remain in the EU. And the SNP would rephrase it, and they'd want to stay in the EU but take Scotland out of the UK. Well, the UKIP would be the no-deal party at that point. Given that they have the clearest pro-Brexit response, they would probably gain a lot of votes through that. The DUP and Plaid Cymru obviously put their nation's interests first. The DUP obviously has a huge stake in the entire Brexit negotiation process because of the whole Northern Ireland border issue. I think it's too complicated to judge what would happen, given that there are just simply too many factors to consider. The online world is telling me that the anti-establishment is gaining popularity again. Whatever Parliament agrees in a deal, it will be rejected by the public, even if they agree a deal, even if they don't agree a deal. Whatever they do, the public will hate them, and that will make them, whether we have a general election before the end of negotiations or after negotiations, turn to protest parties like UKIP, the Lib Dems, the SNP, and that will eventually lead to the breakup of the UK. But I feel like England and Wales will one way or another be out of the EU. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, join in the debate and subscribe.